The Gothic Remake has been in development for nearly 5 years now, and after a very long wait, we finally got to see some actual in-game video footage of its progress for the first time since that disastrous playable teaser that debuted back in late 2019. Rest assured, the developer, Alkimia Interactive, listened to the feedback and made a major course shift when going into full production, with this new showcased video at least appearing to stick much closer to the original stylings and sensibilities of the original Gothic, as opposed to whatever they were doing with that playable teaser. I was of course extremely critical of that teaser in 2019, but it would at least seem that all or most of my major concerns have been addressed in some manner in this showcase video, or at least they're not readily apparent because they're not being shown. At 4 minutes and 22 seconds long, it's not a very elaborate presentation, however. Over 30% of its runtime is dedicated to just recreating the original cinematic intro almost word for word and almost shot for shot, showing a few establishing shots of the three camps while explaining their ideologies to those who may be unfamiliar with the original game's concept, and then of course just sitting on the various logos. Most of the actual gameplay is showed in only 2 or 3 second chunks, some of them for only a fraction of a second, with highly curated selections, possibly staged scenarios, and sometimes bizarre camera angles that make it hard to really trust what we're seeing as actual gameplay. After all, it's really easy to make something look good when you strip all the surrounding context from it, present it in a glorified way, and talk about how great it's going to be. For example, I'm sure you could make the combat from the playable teaser look good and authentic to the original game in a trailer if you only ever showed one attack at a time and deliberately hid the directional interface system. And we of course know how well that combat worked in practice, and they likewise said at the beginning of that experience that they were huge fans of the original game and wanted to maintain and strengthen the original atmosphere while then proceeding to do the exact opposite. So it's important to remember that it's virtually impossible to draw any realistic conclusions from any of what we're seeing or hearing in this video. Still, the narration is at least saying all the right things I want to hear, like focusing on having a realistic, immersive world, rewarding character progression, open world freedom, an emphasis on exploration, reactive and dynamic quests, a complex and demanding combat system, and so on. Some of this feels like stating the obvious to me, where they're either reiterating positive aspects that we already know from Gothic 1, like being able to explore or do quests in any order, or else are hyping up features that really shouldn't be considered exceptional in this day and age. Making such a big deal about the NPCs having daily schedules or the world seeming to exist without the player is a bit of a weird flex in 2024, for example. That was a pretty novel feature for Gothic back in 2001, and yes, it should absolutely be part of the Gothic remake, but nowadays I just feel like that should be the standard expectation for any game of this genre, and so advertising it like that just doesn't seem all that impressive to me. Other comments come off as overly grandiose marketing hype bordering on outright misinformation, like talking about the unprecedented freedom this open world offers. That makes the LA Noire doubt meme immediately come to mind. Cause isn't it already preceded by the original Gothic? And haven't plenty of other games offered as much or more freedom in the decades since? There have been some really high bars set in the last several years by much bigger and more prolific studios, and so I seriously doubt the veracity of that claim, especially seeing as this is supposed to be a relatively small and much more focused game than some other open world games that put an even stronger focus on freedom. Then there's talk of enjoying a complex life simulation on a scale hardly ever seen before in a video game, where again, I'm just like, what exactly do you mean by that? Gothic was never a realistic life simulator. You had unlimited inventory space, no stamina or fatigue system, no need to sleep, eat, or drink, instant health recovery by eating or drinking potions, and so on. So are you putting those types of systems in the game, or are you referencing more nebulous concepts like beginning a new life as a prisoner and having to earn a living for yourself within this ecosystem? If the former, then is that necessarily a good thing? And if the latter, then what's so complex about that, and why does the scale matter, and how has something like that been hardly ever seen before in a video game? Comments like these make me feel skeptical because the claims are just so bold that I have a difficult time believing they'll actually deliver on them or that they even mean what they say. What excites me most is the prospect of there being room to develop the experience further by telling new stories from the colony and expanding on those that die-hard fans have known for more than 2 decades. If there's any area in Gothic 1 that has strong potential for improvement, it's the relative lack of side content in later chapters apart from the single Chromanon side quest and all the obvious remnants of cut content that was left in the game in some incomplete fashion, or else was merely suggested but with no actual event surrounding it. They weren't explicit about what types of new content they're adding, but there's suggestions that the Chromanon quest may be getting expanded if that shot of the tower is meant to correlate to the spoken narration. There's also a shot of new dialogue with Drax indicating what might be a new quest of some sort. I'm guessing as part of an expanded tutorial for hunting and cooking or something. This, by the way, is the only tease we get of what the interface aesthetic might be, which looks to be reasonably minimalistic. During this section about new stories, they also have a shot of the hero swimming underwater near some wreckage, which is probably the exchange zone, but it makes me think it might be cool to have a quest that somehow involves diving through the flooded lake area behind the dam of the new camp for some reason. There's also a brief shot of the old camp guards with a caravan of wagons, presumably heading for the exchange zone, meaning we may get some kind of questline or activity between the new camp and old camp trying to raid or defend the old camp supply line, which again was something various characters talked about but which we never actually saw happen. Other things like the glowing orb in the swamp or Quentin's bandit group would seem like obvious areas to expand into proper content, but none of these are explicitly shown in the video. Unless this shot of the player as a water mage casting a spell on a bunch of rogues is supposed to be Quentin's group, but you could always go there and attack them, so that by itself isn't new. There's also a shot of what may be Kurgo walking into the arena, possibly suggesting that we may actually see tournaments as a real thing, which again is something that allegedly happened in the old camp, but which we never actually got to see. That would be nice if that's the case, but it could very well just be depicting Kurgo going in there to train like he always does, or as part of Scatty's quest to earn his vote to join the Shadows, so who knows. Then of course there's all the room to expand on existing mechanics which were admittedly a little bare bones in the original. The showcase video explicitly mentions enhancing many aspects of gameplay, such as more complex crafting and more rewarding character progression. The important image here is a player at an alchemy table presumably brewing a potion which did not exist in Gothic 1 but was later added in Gothic 2. In fact, the crafting system was almost non-existent in Gothic 1, with you only ever being able to forge basic crude swords and only being able to fry basic meat. So you'd have to think that in addition to alchemy there'd be more weaponsmithing and cooking recipes, which would certainly be nice to have. And I'm assuming that more rewarding character progression may mean more new skills to learn or with more steps to advance the existing skill systems. After all, it was admittedly extremely quick and easy to master one-handed sword combat in the original game, so it would make sense to do more with that in terms of the leveling system, either by expanding it to last longer, sort of like they did in Gothic 2 and later Risen 1, or by adding extra perks or special attacks to learn. We can almost certainly expect that combat will get overhauled in some manner, because even though I'm partial to the original game's combat system, I would cynically guess that modern gamers would not take to it very well. And unfortunately, the showcase video is extremely vague and unhelpful about shedding any light on the new combat because it's all just so disjointed. There are times when it looks like it's trying to stick pretty close to the original system. For instance, we can see the player holding a one-handed sword with two hands like you do when you're untrained in the original, and some of those attack animations with the pickaxe likewise remind me of untrained two-handed movesets. But then there are some other unfamiliar looking animations, and you can't tell if any of these different attacks are supposed to be lateral side attacks like you could do in the original, or if they're all part of one generic set of animations. It's possible that it may be showing different stages of combat training in different shots, but with the video only ever showing one attack in complete isolation and only ever one complete combo by an enemy NPC, it's really hard to tell. In general, the combat looks like it might be okay, provided the upgraded movesets have a faster flow and responsiveness to them than what we see here. I'm totally on board with the untrained movesets being slow and clunky, but I feel like it's a misnomer when people say Gothic's melee was slow and clunky, because it actually became really snappy and responsive with higher skill training, which I'm not sure they showed in this video. That one Digger's attacks, however, are slow as molasses and telegraphed from a mile away, while some of the player's attacks are likewise incredibly sluggish. Slow combat is fine as long as it has good weight and momentum to it, but I would still prefer it to be a little faster and more fluid than what we see here, which hopefully will come with more advanced combat training. Archery and Magic now seem to use free aiming instead of the lock-on auto-target system, which is to be expected, but as with the melee combat, we really can't tell how any of this functions in practice, like how much of an impact the bowstring will have on timing, distance, or power, or what the effect of gravity or travel time will have on the arrow's flight path, if any. From just seeing the hero plink off a few handful of individual shots at close-range targets, it doesn't look all that satisfying to me. Maybe a stronger impact sound and more recoil from the target might help, but again, it's hard to really judge on so little footage and not getting to feel any of it in practice. Magic would seem to have been overhauled as well, the most notable examples being a cone-based ice attack, an AoE wind fist-like spell, and lots of all-new visual effects like the rune spinning around in the air during casting, and all the charred effects on the snapper, or razor, when hit with a fireball. Magic could potentially be fun, since it would seem really easy to expand with new spells and functions, though I'll be interested to see how they balance it and what they do for mana costs. Graphically, the game looks pretty decent to me. There are obvious rough spots, of course, but the tone seems reasonably close to the dreary, gloomy sort of look that the colony had, without a bunch of excessively bright colors or glowing bloom or blinding white post-processing effects like we saw in the playable teaser, which is a step in the right direction. The lighting is perhaps a little too harsh at times, however, like it's a little too sunny with god rays and crisp shadows that I hope wouldn't be there all the time. And it seems like it may be washing out some of the images a little too much, to the point of looking like there's some kind of cinematic filter over everything. I think generally speaking, I like the images with the softer, more diffused lighting and shadows, or where there's some other light source besides the sun, so I would think that just having more cloud coverage with overcast skies would help achieve the game's bleak look a little better. Plenty of shots look really good though, so I'm really splitting hairs here and don't care too strongly one way or the other. Most of the actual environments are convincing enough. I especially like the look of the swamp camp, which is super dense and lush with vegetation and a green haze in the air, and the super dark forest during the thunderstorm. It's really important to me that the forests feel dense and scary, however, which might not be the case with these narrow tree trunks and wide spacing. The original game had to cheat in this regard by putting up a texture of solid tree trunks that would progressively fade further away as you moved through the forest to make it seem like it was super thick with trees and thus limit your range of view, which worked effectively back in 2001 but obviously would not be believable these days, so I'm not sure what the solution is. The armor sets likewise look like they're staying true to the original style, but with a little more practical appearance for some of the heavier sets, which is a fine enough compromise for me. Where things get weird is the monsters. Almost every creature has been completely redesigned into an all-new stylistic look. This really shouldn't bother me because it's purely a visual thing, and I'm ultimately much more concerned about how the game feels than how it looks, but it does bother me a bit that literally every creature they showcase, except for mole rats and maybe the lizards, is like an entirely reimagined concept. I mean, the orcs remind me more of Warcraft orcs than Gothic orcs, or like those dopey gobos from Gothic 3 if they spent a lot of time in the gym beefing up, and their armor looks a little too Warhammer-y, or like they've been hanging out with the Morcons from Elix 2 a little too much. The original orcs had a visceral primal quality to them that I'm just not getting in this new look, which feels too sleek and generic. Things like the scavengers and snappers or razors don't really bother me, but the goblins and mine crawlers are another example that feel like more generic looking fantasy creatures than the unique look they had in the original. I don't mind changing the looks of these things in theory, but I just want them to maintain some sort of originality, and this looks far less interesting to me. I'm pleased to notice a lot of the same music and sound effects, although that should come as no surprise knowing that the original sound guy, Kai Rosenkrantz, was hired to do the music.
And then there is the sect from the swamp. They believe that a mysterious new deity will free them from their prison.
It sounds like a new recording or arrangement with different sound patches, but it's obviously using the same motifs for everything, including all of the camps and exterior wilderness stuff. I think I even noticed some of the sound effects being either the exact same, like when your character gets hit,
The game will always respond appropriately to your decisions.
or being incredibly similar, like with the minecrawler noises.
Its effectiveness depends on training.
I've always felt like the music was a major part of establishing Gothic's unique tone and atmosphere, so it should go a long way to have so much of the original music being redone by the original creator, but I would also hope for some new music that matches the old style as well. Lastly, it's worth pointing out that I didn't notice any jumping or ledge climbing in this trailer, which is mildly concerning. One of Gothic's main selling points was its great verticality, which was aided by the freeform jumping and climbing system that allowed you to explore practically everywhere that you could realistically reach or grab onto. This was of course ruined by the scripted hotspot climbing in the playable teaser, where you could only climb specific surfaces that you were specifically intended to climb, and there's no evidence in the showcase trailer that they've gone to a more open, freeform system. We do see some weird Spider-Man or Breath of the Wild style wall climbing though, which is a little bizarre and unexpected to say the least. I'm not sure how I feel about it, but it may be limited to specific locations, like climbing minecrawler webs on the wall or something, so again, who knows. Overall, this teaser is much more promising than what we experienced with the playable teaser 5 years ago. From what little they've said and shown, it seems like they understand that the remake should stick pretty closely to recreating all of the things that made the original game so beloved in the first place, and are focusing their efforts on adding on to the core experience with new content and extra depth in the mechanics and some necessary modernization, instead of completely reinterpreting everything and slapping the Gothic name on it like what might have been the case 5 years ago had that playable teaser not been met with such harsh criticism. There's no way to tell from this video if they're actually going to succeed at capturing the spirit of the original, and in fact, everything here is going to be completely meaningless once the game is actually released and we see it for ourselves. But it would seem that they're at least trying to do the right thing and are on the right path. Ultimately, this video doesn't really move the bar for me, as I've been cautiously optimistic the whole time, and there's not enough concrete info here to prove anything one way or the other, so I'll continue to remain cautiously optimistic. But then again, the showcase doesn't end with you getting punched in the face when the narrator says, "Welcome back to the colony." So disregard everything else I've said. All hope is lost, and this remake is conclusively going to suck.
Welcome to the colony.